inspirational? Or is it always accompanied by possessiveness? Ladies and gentlemen, today we are here to explore these questions in the form of Josephine Chia's book, My Mother-in-Law's Son. Thank you for coming and sharing your precious Saturday afternoon with us today. My name is Ho Fan. I'm the publisher of Ika's books, and I want to thank you once again for coming. Now, maybe I'll just give you a little background to this book first before I talk a little bit about Josephine, and then Josephine will talk about the book. When I first saw this title, My Mother-in-Law's Son, it brought to mind. When I first saw this title, My Mother-in-Law's Son, that Josephine showed me, it brought to mind a lot of issues. I remember my mother-in-law, and I knew immediately what she was trying to say, maybe, right? If the book is what I thought it was. It would be something that really resonates with not only myself, but I think with many people. Because sometimes we find that after we get married, we don't just marry the person we love, but also the person's mother or father, or the family even sometimes, right? And so therefore I thought that this was a fantastic title. And when this is a reissue by the way, she wanted a reissue, meaning that the book was first published many years ago, but Josephine has added additional chapters, has put on additional chapters to the book, and she wanted to change the title. I said no way, because to me the title speaks volumes for this book. Right? Because it is also an exploration not just of love, but also of passion. Must passion be something that is only articulated in the physical form? Or is this also in the mental form? And so in this story, there is also, or in this book, there is also the story of a Singapore and a people after World War II. The passions that came from people who were struggling to free themselves from a colonial yoke, and people who were struggling to find new meaning and a new identity in the new world. Right? And so you find in this book stories of communists in Singapore. Yeah? I do not share their flag, but I share their passion. And I think we all need to share the passion in articulating and pursuing the things that matter to us. And this book is really all about that. Right? And of course, Josephine has by her own life exhibited that passion, because she, I don't want to date her, but she was one of the earliest writers in Singapore, right, back in the last century.
Really old.
Yeah, she was really one of those who sort of wrote. And you know, writers in Singapore cannot make money. We all know that. But she chose to pursue that route, and I respect her for that. And this is now her 8th book, right? And I think it is something to be celebrated, right? And of course, in the process, Josephine has also shown herself, or has gained recognition, not just in Singapore, but also internationally, because she is an award-winning writer, not just winning awards in Singapore, but also in the UK, the bastion of writing, you know. And that is really an achievement, I think, that we must celebrate. So today, I want you to join me in celebrating the writings of Josephine Chia, to celebrate her passion in pursuing what she believed must be shared, and in thanking her for bringing stories of old Singapore to us. Thank you, Josephine. I will turn on to tell you more about the book.
Well, thank you everyone for coming, especially when there are so many other good programs in the Singapore Writers Festival up in SMU. So I really appreciate you coming here for the afternoon. And thank you, Ho Fan, for all that passionate introduction. And he's making me sound old. When I used to say to people I was born in the colonial period, that already sounded old. Now it's worse than last century. So what I thought it might be a good idea, because some of you are not from Singapore, to just run some slides just to show you what was happening around that time in Singapore. This book takes place in 1949 and 1950. I'm not sure if everyone can see the slide. I'm so sorry it's at the end because we couldn't get the screen. Is that okay? So this is just to give, the slides will just give a background of what was happening at that time. And then we'll talk about it as we go along. And hopefully I will leave some time for questions and of course maybe a discussion and a couple of short readings perhaps. So Adelina is going to help me with this one. So 1945, the British came back to Singapore, and we have to remember that the people in Singapore welcomed them back, of course, after the war. So although this story takes place in 1949, we are still feeling the effects of the British returning, and not only the physical return, but the attitude that is prevalent at the time, of how the Singapore people felt towards the British during the war and then post-war. And what is important is that we have to realize that the British had to do a lot of good to help Singapore to, because there was destruction, there was bombing, so there are areas in the country which really look like a building site. So they have to do a lot to help the country. King George was on the throne at that time in England, and then on the top for a slide, you will see the banana money. That is the Japanese money that they had at the time during the war. And what happened was too many people hoarded the money. So unfortunately that caused a lot of poverty as well, because when the British came in and reissued the Malay money with King George head there, you'll see the banana money became worthless. So that caused part of the poverty. Obviously, besides the lack of jobs, the shortage of food and all that kind of thing. So those are the kind of issues that are being explored in the book. Just in case you are not familiar, the main house in this book is set in Changi, and I want to just show you the area in the old Changi before the land reclamation. And Changi is actually from the word pokok Changi. Malay word for tree is pokok. So pokok Changi was the tree that was prevalent in the East Coast. Unfortunately, because of the land reclamation, they were all destroyed. So that's what the name means, and the main action takes place there in Changi. And this is the kind of house that you would have seen most of the coastline in East Coast and Pasir Panjang. And so the main house in this book has been given a name, Pasir Emas. Pasir means sand in Malay, Emas means gold, golden sand. So this is set in this particular area in Changi, which was of course born in the 1960s when the reclamation started. They destroyed most of these houses. They were really lovely houses. And I've been in them, and one of the things you always remember is that when you're in the house and when the tide is coming in, you feel that you're at sea. It's wonderful sound with the waves going underneath the house. So the main house in this book is this kind of house. So just to give you an idea of it. And this is a great world. So there are three main characters in this book. My mother-in-law son, the first person narrator, is a woman called Swigate, a Peranakan woman, surprise, surprise. But so she tells the story, but the other two narrators are in the third person. So one is her husband, Kam Chong, who frequents the cabaret in Kitchener Road quite a lot. So this is one of the main places, locations that are mentioned in the book. So I thought you might like to take a look. And this is actually a family entertainment place outside, but inside there is a cabaret where there are girls that you dance with, and you give a ticket and you get a ronggeng or whatever kind of dance in your face. So this is quite a famous, it's gone now. I think it's, I can't remember its name now. So there is a place called New World something in Kitchener Road right now. Then the other two worlds are Great World and Happy World. Happy World then changed its name to Gay World, and that's around Geylang. So those are the kind of entertainment areas that were for the family. You have like fun fair things outside, and then inside there's a cabaret kind of thing for the men. So. this is obviously Robinson's department store in Raffles Place in the old days. There was a big fire that destroyed this building. And so a lot of the people who were shopping there were the English, and only the very, very rich Singapore people. So in my other book, Kampung Spirit and From Ganda Bokacha, I tell you that my family would go there just to look through the windows, only at the window dressing, because we then go in, you know, because we think that people might think, oh my God, they can't afford to buy anything in here. So most of the English were shopping here. And I want to show you where the local people would shop. In the next slide, you will see that they made a parody of the name. Instead of Robinson's, it became Robinson's Petang. Petang means afternoon in, this is Robinson's Petang, which is by Sungai Road. It existed till quite a long time actually. If you know Rochor Road, then there's a branch tributary of Sungai Road. And that they would be selling, it's like a flea market, they would sell the food and you know, things. And people who can't afford the real thing from Robinson's will go to Robinson's Petang in the afternoon. And they say some of these things might be dropped off the back of the lorry, so you don't even know whether they are legitimate. But people go, most of the population will shop at this kind of area. So just to contrast, because the main character, Swede, comes from the kampong, but her husband is a very rich man, and he lives in that big house that you saw earlier. So I wanted to provide the contrast between the poor people struggling after post-war and how some of the rich people were enjoying their life in almost as if there hadn't been a war. So there's a kind of contrast with the two types of people. Also, Kam Chong, the husband, is very overweight, and he's overweight for a reason, because during the Japanese War, when the Japanese came in, and they suddenly felt that anyone who is Chinese and connected to China must be anti them. So they went around and they actually had a huge they collected all the young men that they put in this awful thing called the Suqing massacre, where they massacred all the Chinese. And then they took young men to work to dig trenches and all that. So Kam Chong, the main character, escaped this because he was overweight. He was, you know, he couldn't move very much, although he's very young. And also because his father was very influential. He was a businessman, and his father was called Grandpa Wong. So basically they protected. So what I'm trying to say is to give you viewpoints from how the rich and the poor had to suffer the war and post-war. How do they cope with all the various things that were happening? And this is Satay Club in Beach Road. I don't know, maybe some of you may have been to Beach Club Satay Club in Beach Road, just off Beach Road. That used to be the sea. Before the new Esplanade, that was where the seafront is, and we used to have these hawkers coming together in the evening to sell their satay. So they call it Satay Club. It's not a club, just hawkers coming together. So many of us, like people like me who lived in the last century, obviously had been to that particular Satay Club before land reclamation. So the new Esplanade that you see right now is actually a little bit way out further than it used to be. And before that, in the 1800s, we had the sea coming right up to where the Padang was. So you imagine that Singapore has changed geographically, physically, So this is also a main place where people would go to eat. Local people would go to eat, so it's also in the book. That's why I thought it'd be nice for you to see a slide. There are lots of obviously very hungry people after the war. I mean, this is common in every country that has gone through the war. So, but the British set up soup kitchens, and they were feeding the children. And Swike tries to go out to do some work, to help them, to help the children and to feed them. But her husband won't allow it. So this is another of the things that I particularly like to emphasize, is how some of the women were very much constrained by their times, by the attitude of that time, that they can't go out, they can't do things, and so they have to be their hands are tied. So even if they want to do something good, they can't do it because their husbands won't allow it. There's very little freedom for women. And this was at a time where a man, especially a Chinese man, could marry, 2 or 3 wives, or 5 or 10, or whatever number of wives he liked. So there was no sort of legal law that helped women or protect women until we had the Women's Charter in about 1963, I think. Don't quote me on the year. That's when the law was made that, okay, men should legally marry a woman and they can't have, numerous wives and all that kind of thing. Besides the wives, of course, they have the children, right? The children of husbands who are always here and there. His wife number 1 on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. By the time he comes back, the children haven't eaten or things like that. So those are the kind of issues I like to explore. I've explored in the book. And this is a time of rebellion in a way. And I think that this is something that we have to think about. No country, in any country, if there is dissatisfaction or unhappiness, that is when you become prone to being subjected to, ideas that are outside the norm. So whether it's a modern country or it's an old country, when people start to be unhappy with the issues in the country, when they're unhappy with the government or whatever, then people start to rebel. And the rebellion took place in a way in the schools, in the Chinese schools mostly, because there were some communist insurgents who came to Singapore and infiltrated in the schools. So Deng Sin Nan, which is one of the main of the 3 characters, is a communist insurgent. So he has come in and he came into the school so that it doesn't look as though it's something that's political, but it's something that's cultural. So there's quite a difference, because if you're saying you're trying to protect the Chinese cultural, your culture and your religion and everything else, you're not actually directly saying, I'm against the colonial government. So they are promoting Chinese culture, but through that promotion, in a way, they are getting at the colonial government. So there were lots of unrest in the country. People were rioting. This actually started from that period of rioting started in the 1940s, right up into the 60s. In Kampung Spirit, I covered the other kind of unrest, and at a time where initially in the kampongs in the 1960s, people would get on very well with each other, the Malays, the Chinese, the Indians and all that. It's only latterly in the 60s where there was a problem with a procession with Muhammad birthday or something like that. And there was a Chinese policeman who kind of asked somebody to stand in line or something. And then that started the Malay Chinese riots. So we have that kind of riots and problem throughout the 50s and the 60s. Actually, this book doesn't cover it, but at the end of the book, actually, in the end of 1950, there was the Maria Hertog affair, which is a Dutch girl who was, during the war, being taken care of by a Muslim family because the parents were in jail. And so the Muslim parents took care and brought her up until she was about 14, I think. Then married her off to a Muslim man. And then the parents, the Dutch parents found her again and wanted her back. And so they had a huge court case, and when they went to court, the colonial government gave the parents permission to take the daughter back, although the mother, the Muslim mother, wanted her to remain in Singapore. So that caused huge riot between the Malay Chinese, the colonial government, and that was a really, that period was really bad news really in Singapore. Unfortunately, I stopped just before that, because I thought it was famous enough, well-known enough not to tackle it again. And I just wanted to show you what the riot police used to wear, and how they dressed, and they had these rattan shields, and they were quite a sight in Singapore, at that time, growing up in the 1950s and 1960s. So it was really a period of unrest and social unrest, and that makes people unhappy and insecure. And this insecurity and unrest really kind of generate people, thinking the way they were thinking towards the colonial government. So, in a way, I've gone backwards because I've tackled the 1960s and 1950s. Now I'm going a little bit back. But if you look at Kampong Spirit, which has the 1950s, you will see how the Singapore people then start to react towards the colonial government. So this is only the beginning of that, the sowing of the seeds of discontent. So you will notice there that the policemen were wearing shorts, and just like Ho Fang was saying, that was born in the last century. If I say anything to my kids, what they'll say is, that was the days when the policemen wear shorts. So anyway, I thought I'll just pass this to Ho Fang.
Thank you, Josephine. I think to be fair also, the British, after they withdrew, the colonial government, we all sort of stood up against them and said that we wanted freedom and so on. But they actually were very gentlemanly about it. They left us a legacy of administration and infrastructure, which I think is a little bit underestimated or underappreciated by Singaporeans. Because if you look at other colonial powers, not just the British, in other countries where they left the country in a big, huge mess. And I think that we have to be grateful for diplomacy.
Can I add something? Yes, that's one of the main points. And so what happened, I have a communist, Ting Sing Nan, one of the main characters, and then the husband, Kam Chong. But with Swigate, the main narrator, she is kind of not pro-British, but what she is saying, she's trying to talk in an intelligent way. Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. The British has done a lot of good for this country as well. There are these things, these things. So what I try to do is give a balanced, view of the things. Don't say this is all bad, because nothing is black and white in life. There's always a area of grey, and we can discuss things. So that's what I try to do with the three main characters, so that they have that kind of viewpoint. And I try not to make a judgment. So I'm not saying anywhere in the book, this is good or that is good, or whoever is good. Is the communist better, or what is the communist trying to do? What is the British trying to do? I'm not saying which, so I'm trying to allow the reader to make the judgment at the end of the day.
Thank you. Yeah. And so this book, like I said, though it's a reissue, the first edition was published almost 20 years ago, 1994, if I'm not wrong, yeah? Almost 20 years. And I think that this new book, or rather this book, reissue, actually contains new chapters. And probably these new chapters came about after feedback that Josephine had from readers and so on. And I want to say that in that sense, I would consider it really a new book. And even if you have the old book, you should buy this one. And take a look at the key review. Right? Okay, wow. Okay, that's a commercial plug. Okay. Right. Maybe now what I'll do is this, Josephine, perhaps you could just read us a couple of extracts, and then before we open the floor for questions and so on. Yeah.
This particular chapter is Ting Sing Nam's chapter. He's the young communist who has come over from China. Now, we tend to think like the word communist sounds like a bad thing or negative thing, but we have to remember that the ideology, the idea behind communism, the reason why they want to have a communal sort of good, if you like, they are trying to do something good as well. So what I'm trying to do then is to show the human side of this person, not that I'm pro-communist or pro-British or pro-anything, but just to show that we are at certain levels, we're all human. We have to cope with human feelings, desires. We have to, and we suffered the similar things, whether it's in China or in Singapore, where you're deprived of food. That is when you become easy to be influenced by someone else. And this particular excerpt that I'm going to read you is taking place in the jungles in Malaya. And we know, obviously, if we know the history of Singapore, we know about Chin Peng and the communists and all that. So, of course, there is mention on Chin Peng, but what I try to do is move away from in a way, the real history, because I'm presenting a fictional aspect of it. And then you, as the reader, can decide whether this is connected with Chin Peng or it's not. Because I'm not making that judgment. I'm just offering a viewpoint of how the communists used to operate. And what they did was, at one point, the British were trying to get them to cooperate with them to get rid of the Japanese. So Chin Peng was involved in that. So I think I won't give away too much of the book. So there was a cooperation, let's call it, with the British. But after the British came to Singapore, they decided that no, I don't think we will be in cohort with the communists. So please hand over your arms and all that. So what happened is some of the communists then escaped or ran away they gave away, they brought out some arms, but the rest of them went in hiding in the jungles. So this is a little excerpt when Teng was taken blindfolded to this communist camp in the jungle. And he met a very old man called Pao. And Pao looks very decrepit and very old. And this scene just takes place in the evening after he had met up with the communist leaders who gave him instructions on how to infiltrate the schools in Singapore. So, and this Teng Sing Nam has just come out of his room and he was looking at the moon. And then this opening speech is by Pao. And Pao said, "You wouldn't think that something so beautiful and gentle could influence the tides, would you? Ah, the power of the yin." The voice accompanying the cigarette emerged from the darkness. It was Pao. "You see, my friend, the white people war with aggression. That's a young quality. It's outward, obvious. Our work is more subtle, gentle, or insidious, some might say." "Comrade, I have an apology to make," Teng said, deeply embarrassed. He had been wrong in his judgment of Pao. At dinner, Teng had learned of Pao's heroism, of his torture by the Japanese. He was not the ineffectual old man Teng had assumed Pao to be. "Ah, that. You see only a broken body, and you presume it had always been so. Like young people who look at their parents or grandparents and can never imagine them youthful or spirited. You wonder how I could have been a useful, active member of our party when I'm so decrepit. Do you think the measure of a man's mind is in his body? You drew a wrong conclusion because you base your logic on what your eyes see. Remember, what you see is not always the whole truth. Forgive me, did I convey all of that in that short time when we were having tea? How could I have been so transparent? I ought to be hanged for my impudence," Teng said with sincere dejection. "Never mind that now. Just be grateful that I am not your enemy. Don't forget, your eyes give away much of your soul. They speak for you. So curtain them well. Hold your judgment too. When you judge too soon, you lose the opportunity to learn. Also, you tend to make mistakes. Mistakes are costly in our work. You could pay for them with your life."
Right, I guess some of you might be brimming with questions. This is your opportunity to interrogate her. Questions?
Oh, okay. I want to add something.
All right.
To what extent, I think all can
Oh, you can hear you, yeah.
To what extent is Singapore's history with the communists influenced by development in Malaysia? I remember after the war, the communists can thrive because the villagers supply them with food and everything down there. So now the British very clever. Now fence up all the places, call them new villages. So everybody must go out, must get a permit to go out and come back also black. They make sure they don't get more than their own share of food to the workplace because they supply the community. So the British, I think, got a brilliant idea that new village to have. That means anybody, they fence up all the village, then the people who go out to work in the farm and all that, allow them only to take limited supply of food and not nothing more.
That's
So
right.
a very
Thanks,
big
Siping. This situation at Siping is obvious from my alumnus university. What he's talking about was what happened was, in order to kind of dry out the communists, because all the communists ran after Jinping, if you recall history, he had an award by the British. The British gave him an OBE, by the way, and it was on the wall, on the steps of our civic hall, city hall. Sorry. He was given an OBE. This is the chief and the master instigator, communist and all that. But after the war, the British thought differently and said, oh, somehow he's just become public enemy number one. From being given an OBE, he becomes the public enemy number one. So they forced the communists to hand over their arms. So they kind of pretend to, and the rest went into Malaya, into the various villages. And what the British thought, good idea, what Siping was talking about. What we'll do is, a lot of the people in Malaya were still supporting the communists. You have to remember that the communist idea was to get rid of the Japanese. So, and then they were helping the British do that. But when the war was over, these people became suddenly, you're a public enemy. So the local villagers will give food to the communists in the middle of, if you look at the map, Pahang in the jungle areas. So what the British did was destroy all these villages in the periphery of the jungles. And they created what are called new villages, so that they are in control of that village, so that nobody can supply food to the British. And so in this chapter, what I've just read up, Teng Sing Nan was taken blindfolded up to the camp by one of the local Singapore Chinese men who hated the Japanese, but he's not sure whether he hated the Japanese more or the British more. So he wanted to help all the communists. So they are the ones who take the people through the jungle into the camp, and they took rice and stuff for them as well, the supplies. Although it was getting more and more difficult because of all the areas around the jungle areas were destroyed. People were moved out. People in the villages were told to move. So that's the background behind what Siping said.
I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
Can I have some more? The other is about the communist society. To what extent is Singapore development influenced by the man called Tan Kah Kee? Because he's the one who supported the communists. He went to China, he saw Mao Zedong, he saw the Chiang Kai-shek, and he said Chiang Kai is corrupt and all that. So he planned for Mao Zedong. And then he came to Singapore, he set up that Nan Chiao Zhenpa. And inside there, in his editorial and all that, supporting, praising all the communism and so on and all that. So I think Singapore's history also, to what extent, influenced by Tan Kah Kee.
Okay, I think that question is a very interesting question, and it's something I personally am interested in. But it would take another 1.5 days maybe for us to finish on that. So maybe we address that separately. Let's come back to the what of the book, which for me is always been about passion. Because like I said, I do not share the flag of the communists, but I share their passion. And I share their passion, and just like every one of us, our lives are driven by passion, by what we believe in and what we want to do, right? And this is, I think, what Josephine was trying to do in doing this book. Whether it is in the affairs of the heart or affairs of the state, but it is that passion that drives us, and it is something that we must celebrate and support, because this is what makes us human. This is what brings us to a different level. Right?
Pete, when you write, as you did in Program for a Coconut Shell.
Can everybody hear, John? Oh, you need a mic.
When you wrote the Program for a Coconut Shell, for example, you were writing about Malay. It was something that you were rerunning a video in your mind. You could see it very clearly. Now you've swapped to fiction. Do you have that same impression in your mind as you write? And do you find that, for example, does your mind race ahead of your hand, or is there a disconnect?
Thanks. Can everybody hear that question? Yes, I think fiction writing and non-fiction writing is obviously different. John mentioned the book called Frog and a Coconut Shell, which is about my mom and about the Peranakan culture and all that. The thing with fiction is that it gives you a certain amount of liberty and freedom that a non-fiction, obviously you have to stick to the facts. If you're talking about your mother or a particular culture, that facts has to be there. So, your hands are tied in some way. So I think with fiction, it gives me the freedom to explore different things. For example, like Tofan was saying about passion, the main character is a woman who is admitting that in the 1940s, very constricted by life, by society, and she wants to get out. She has so much passion. She wants to do things, but she's not permitted to do. So I like to explore that kind of things. How do human beings behave when they are in that position, where they are constrained by society, by laws, by government, by husbands or wives or whatever. So I think that is the kind of thing that I wanted to explore. And I thought this situation, I don't know enough about the communists to make it like a non-fiction book. And in a way, I wanted to, because the Chin Peng story and Tan Kah Kee is also whether he's communist, he definitely was instrumental in helping set up schools in Singapore. And eventually, when he went home, his mother was dying, and he went home to China. He wasn't allowed to come back in. So that kind of thing, I mentioned him in the book. So I like to kind of open up the scenario for people to look at the situation. So I think fiction gives me that, yes, and it does run. Like they say, I was talking to someone who's a writer. Most writers are with schizophrenia. We have people talking to us all the time, characters coming into my head. So I feel like a schizo or something. I can't actually write until that character is quite strong in my head, and they know what they want to say. They tell me what to say, and then I'm just taking dictation in a way. I'm writing it down, so I can't claim that this story is my story because I'm only writing it down. But the story is coming through my head. I see pictures, I see it in images, so I see the things happening, and then when it's ready, when the story is there, then I can write it down. And I never know the ending myself because it depends on what the characters are doing.
More questions?
Yeah, I have a question. I'm from the press, and my question is, what advice would you give for all the mother-in-law sons? What advice would you give for all the mother-in-law sons?
Oh, what advice! My God!
What advice would you give for all the mother-in-law sons? I'd like to hear that too.
Oh, yeah, I don't think I can give the answer at all. And I think I'm glad you picked up on the title, and I want the reader to see that. That's why I said to Wofang, maybe it's not such a good title. Shall I change the narrator to a third-person narrator rather than an I person? Because when you write in an I person, everyone thinks that you are the character. This is very difficult for an author, I'm not this lady because she happens to be Peranakan. And why do I make her Peranakan? Because I know a lot about the Peranakan. So it's easy to make a character who's Peranakan. If I make the character to be Chinese or in other Chinese culture, which I'm not, I don't know enough about it. So I make the character Peranakan. And also there's a particular reason, because Peranakan at that time were not looked upon by the other Chinese as very pure. I mean, now we're in fashion, right? So it's nice to be Peranakan. But at that time, we were considered not pure Chinese. So the mother-in-law here is Cantonese. And they are the ones who really say, Chinese, this Changcheng, this Peranakan is a mixed-up kid, mixed up, you're kind of pariah because you don't belong to either the Malays or the Chinese. So there was an issue that I could explore. And I think that when a writer writes and you are choosing a character, you have to have a character that's got several kind of issues and layers, otherwise you get a cardboard character, right? So because I know the Peranakan character, so I thought, well, I'll go with that. So I don't think I can answer the question, but I don't know that modern men are subjected to their mothers-in-law the same way as 1940s or 1950s, I would say. Would you?
Well, I want to share something. I had a very challenging time with my mother-in-law, but in the end,
careful, your wife is around.
A very challenging time, but I love her a lot. And of course, I think there's always a tendency to demonize the mother-in-law, right? And of course, when you're young, you sort of like these thoughts do cross your mind until I became a father-in-law. And then we found ourselves being demonized. And well, that's when we begin to look at the other foot and understand, you know. So really, it's all about looking at the heart of everyone and understanding what is it that drives these people. Yeah, and to us that has worked very well. What is it? Yeah. Okay. Question? Okay, the lady first.
Yes, just think about the Maria Hancock case. I think it's between, what I understand is between the European and the Malay Muslim.
Correct.
How did the Chinese right come in?
The Chinese riots came a little bit later in the 1960s, then when you start to have a kind of distrust, when the Malays start to have a distrust of other people's dominance over them, like the British. The riots that actually began for the Malay Chinese was the Prophet Muhammad's procession. There was a procession that came from City Hall down to Geylang, and during the procession, the Malays were all in their Malay costume and everything. Then the Chinese policemen were around them, and there was somebody who just went out of the group, and so the Chinese policeman was trying to get them back into the group. And for some reason, the Malays turned around and then they clobbered him, and then it started the riot. And then from there were kind of this idea that, you know, the Chinese were trying to regain, to have supremacy over the Malays. That the seeds were being sowed for the Malay Chinese riots at that time.
Sorry, Sharon.
Finn, you say that Swigate isn't you and you're not Swigate. I don't know if this thing's working. But at the same time, it seems to me that you lived through some of the same, you know, the same period. You probably saw women, if not yourself, with the same passions, same constraints, same limitations imposed by others. So I mean, you obviously there has to be some of you in this person, perhaps not necessarily your own personal experiences, but I mean your own sympathies.
Can everybody hear that question about whether I am the character Swigate? Thanks. But I think for a writer, you can't be divorced from who you are as a person, right? It is impossible. You're not totally writing something like if I'm writing an academic report, I can be separate from what I'm writing about. But when you're working in fiction, it's almost impossible to be completely divorced, although the characters do come in. So some of your own thinking and the way you are, your passion and you know what you like and dislike tend to come in a little bit, yes. When I say that this is not my character in the sense that this person lives through in the 1949, so maybe it's a little bit of my mom, a little bit of myself as well, and people, and I think if you want to be a writer, you're very observant about people, how people behave, and you know, you talk to people. So you realize that there are, and I was a nurse for 7, in fact, Dr. Eric Yap was here, he's my boss, and then he is. I was 17 when I was his nurse, and you know, and we just met after 40 years, and he came to my launch for Elbow Spirit. Come on, Eric, put up here. So he was. And so as a nurse, I was also, I think Eric worked out in the rural areas. And when you were working out in the rural areas like Chua Chu Kang and Yio Chu Kang, we worked in Yio Chu Kang, there were lots of women who were under a lot of pressure from their families. And in the days before, you have the Women's Charter. And they were beaten up by their husbands. And there was a lot of abuse that's happening. And growing up in a kampong, in an impoverished kampong, you see that a lot. Or you see either Indian men who have several wives, and they can't afford it. They can't afford it, and then they make some of them are like pimps, because they make the wives work, you know, if it's not for sex, it's for other things, you know. And so they come back, they collect money or have sex or whatever, they go off to wife number 2 and have children there. So this is prevalent in the time I was growing up. So the young women today, you know, are lucky because you have education and you have protection from the law, where those days they aren't. And I wanted to give them a voice, this kind of woman a voice, you know. In fact, can I just read a little? Because this is quite relevant to what we're saying about women not having a voice. And she starts this is Swigate, and this is in an I person. And she's talking of a Eurasian friend called Cecilia. And she said, I think Then I stopped. What's the matter? Cecilia asked anxiously. Do you know, I said, smiling, this is the first time I've said, I think, so openly. Usually, I'm expected to say what my husband thinks, or what he says. Do Eurasian women have to defer to a man's opinions all the time? In some old-fashioned family, yes, Cecilia said, but not in my home. My parents were very liberal. I doubt very much if anyone could coerce me into saying or to mouthing their opinions, Cecilia said, laughing. I've got a good mind as any man, if not better, so why shouldn't I state my own opinion? Anyway, what do you think? You're the first to ask me such a question, I said. It's fantastic just to say the words. Savoring the idea. Anyway, what I think is that two people must be particularly close to each other to be able to share some intimate secrets. You and Phil are so lucky. I found my true love, Cecilia said. Do you remember that legend we used to love listening to in school? The one about swimming 3 times around Aphrodite's rock during the full moon in Cyprus? How can I forget? I said. It was supposed to be a spot in the Mediterranean Sea where Aphrodite was believed to be birthed. I thought about it often and wondered if you remembered it since we used to recount the story and giggle over it. I never forget, Cecilia said. I didn't have to swim around that particular rock in Cyprus, but I did swim around the rock at Pongo. I hope that answers the question.
Questions? Any more?
That's my young mentee. I'm mentoring this young girl. I'm so sorry, some of the, I don't know if everything will be suitable for the young girl. Yes, Teresia. She's from the Creative Arts Program. The government each year pick out some brilliant students to get them into the Creative Arts Program and to teach them to be writers. And I'm one of those that they asked to mentor such a young, aspiring writer. Yes,
yeah, I was
Tricia.
just wondering whether, like the narrator, did you sort of adopt a feminist sort of voice, given like the straight section of the article, as in, were there any feminist thoughts in the book about?
Yes, very good. It is actually quite feminist in a way, although I try not to kind of bring it down like a hammer. So because this is set in 1949, I have to remember that women at that time weren't allowed to speak so openly. So in a way, it has to be in a very oblique way. Because nowadays we can talk about feminism and we can talk about our freedom, about this and that. But in those days, it wasn't possible. So yes, in a way, she is a feminist, but it's done in a very oblique way so that we're talking about everyday issues and ordinary things that she is not permitted to do. So you kind of see it in an oblique way, right? That you are not permitted to do something because you're a woman, like in this particular excerpt. You can't think. You're not allowed to think for yourself. And this is not just in Singapore, this is all over the world. So,
It's wonderful, thank you.
Oh, yeah.
great.
I just admire your memory because there's always you make it up. I know, but it's sort of like in the second half of the last century, like So I'm just wondering about your memory. I mean, all those amazing things that you come up with and you go into so much detail. Where do you get the research from? Is it based only on your own experiences and observations and perceptions from your family and people, or is it also additional research in some other way? Because you also lived in England for a long time.
Yeah.
You were away from this culture.
Thank you. That's coming from a writer as well. Thanks, Roger. A bit of both. And I think I'm more moved by emotion, feeling. So I tend to store that feeling and emotion somehow inside me. I don't actually remember the exact detail of something, but I can recall the emotion and the feeling. And it's very, very interesting. So many people have asked me this. I've lived 30 years in England, but I don't write about English characters. And people say, why? Except one. The one that won the award has an English man and a Malay woman, but it's still set in Singapore. Because Singapore is in my blood. Somehow, I didn't go to England when I was a child. I was already in my 30s. So therefore, I am truly a Singaporean or Singapore born, you know. So, I moved by feelings. And I think that when I write from feelings. And so what I do is that if I let the feeling take me somewhere, say that whether it's poverty or the constraint of women or something like that, and then if there is a need for research, for example, I need to remember a particular date. I was giving a talk at the University of Singapore recently, and I was asking people about, you know, how much does a bowl of noodles cost in 1950 Singapore? And there was kind of like a debate. Some people say 10 cents, some people say 30 cents. And those are the kind of things where then I thought, I have to go to research. Then I use the National Archives, the National Library, you know, to research on the exact amount that it would have cost. I didn't remember, or some details about it. But I can remember the feeling. For example, in Kampung Spirit, one of the things that kind of moved me was the opening of the Merdeka Stadium. It was quite interesting because it's just opening of a bridge, and at that time we still didn't have independence. So we couldn't be Merdeka, which is independent. You know, we didn't have it yet, but we had built the bridge in anticipation of the independence. But what I remembered was the ceremony. I was only about maybe 5 or 6, and when my father took me there, and the crowd of people, and at that time our airport was still there, the Kallang Basin, you know, airport, and then they had the bridge, and there was an Italian designer who designed the lion on the Merdeka Bridge. And what I remember was the ceremony, and I thought, because there was, at the end of the ceremony, the Indian, each of the community had a different ceremony. So the Chinese had their dragon boat and all that. The Malays had their kole, which is a small, like a sampan. And then the Indians, they hired a small plane, and they flew over the Kallang Basin, and it threw out rose petals. And I can never forget that. It threw out rose petals all over the crowd, you know, all the people, and the rose petals were coming down, and they smelled beautiful, and they were colorful, and that stuck in my mind. So some of these feelings are inside the writer, and I think that as you write, in fact, you actually uncover more, not less. And then I remember, oh yes, I forgot this and forgot that. And also, like when I come to a talk or something like that, people remind me about something else, and then I may have to research. Yeah, so it's a bit of both.
Thank you. Questions? Okay.
So I can, it's not really a question, it's just a little note.
Okay.
I am very happy that you didn't change the title. I love it, and I am quoting it to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Talking about writer's viewpoint.
Thank you. Anyone?
Yeah, I think it's
Would you?
yeah, Josephine. When you write a story, I think it's just very. I mean, I love reading your stories, so I'm here. But you have deliberately set it within a time period. So I'm just wondering, what's your greatest challenge about putting a book in that time frame? Isn't it easier to just write a story that is filled with emotions, and, you know, but you have a time frame there, like Singapore, a bit of history. So, like, what do you find challenging about putting history, like fiction? Your fiction in history. So.
Yeah, I know that. Thanks for the question. There are books now that use a lot of historical incidents and all that in, and sometimes they make the character talk as well as though they are relating with historical characters. I don't think. I think they call it faction. I think it's a new word. I believe they are using. Say that you take a character like Winston Churchill or something, and you pretend to be Winston Churchill, you know, and you make them go through events that you have created. I don't think I can do that. I would be too nervous to do that. But I like to have it in the facts or the history as a background. And actually, as I said, when I was in England, I think your sense of identity of who you are become more important when you're away, certainly for me. When I was in England and asked myself, who am I? You know, am I British? You know, some people when they go abroad, they pick up the British accent or the American accent or whatever, and I said, no, I mustn't do this, I'm me, I was quite determined not to be anybody but myself, and then especially being a Peranakan, so I kind of, was really selling the Peranakan idea before Peranakan became fashionable. And then when I came back to Singapore, I realized that a lot of young people were unaware of the history of Singapore. There's lots of history of Singapore was lost to the young people. What Singapore looked like in the 1960s and 50s. So I began to have a passion to make sure that the young people become aware of it. My own children and grandchildren, that one day grow up and Singapore is a great metropolis and none of the kampong or heritage buildings around, they will have a foundation, because I feel that history, your cultural and social history is part of who you are, the foundation of who you are. Without that, you are rootless, in some ways. And as I felt I was being in UK, and I'm thinking, I lived out in the rural England, so not in London. So therefore, I'm the only Asian that walk around, unless you get the guys from the Chinese restaurant or the Indian restaurant. I'm the only Asian. So you suddenly become so aware of yourself and who you are. And I was determined to be myself, be my culture. I still wear the sarong kebaya in winter, so that's a challenge. You've got to wear stockings and all that kind of thing. But it was necessary for me, for myself, for my own development to be myself. So I find that the period is also very interesting, like the Kampung Spirit, which you read, 1955 to 1965. It's such an interesting period of Singapore's history. It tells everything, in fact, the 10 year, the decade, because we were British. We were the only people who were British, and then we became Malaysian, then we became Singaporeans, so we were like 3 nationalities within a decade. And how were people feeling? I wanted to show the young Singaporean, how did people feel when we talk about, Malaysia now, you see all these people in Tudong, we are not them. But in those days, we were part of Malaya. Malaya and us, my family came from Malacca, the Peranakans are either from Malacca or Penang. So we have families across there was no border because we are the same country. So we feel like one with them. So when the separation came, when they became independent in 1957, and we didn't become independent, we were in shock. People here were in shock. And those are the kind of things I like to capture, for the young people. And even to remind us, that was the time when we were all one. We were all the same country. And we were all the same people. And then we got separated in 1957. That's even before Malaysia. And then Malaysia happened, and then we were kicked out. And then again, another separation. So it was very traumatic, and I think this forms part of Singapore's identity. We have to find who we are as in Singapore. Because we have gone from one thing to the other, we've lost this and we've lost that and regained that. Who are we? And I think our history and the things and our culture forms that foundation, which I feel is important.
Okay, perhaps maybe take one last question, after which we can adjourn for food and continue the conversation within the room or outside the room. Yeah? Yes.
As a Singaporean, I must thank you, Josephine, for preserving the precious heritage of Singapore through your books. I think I resonate with a lot of what you're saying, but I'm not as articulate as you. I haven't read any books. So you have really done us a very great service. And more than that, I'm just curious, because as a woman, older than you, but having gone through, all these things, I'm also Peranakan, just wondering whether your period overseas released this great tension in you to flower and write and express yourself as a woman, embodying the spirit of your mother and your neighbors that you see the women. That must have been a triggering factor, right? For all these latent emotions in you. And do you think that this was brought about by the fact that you were away from Singapore? Whereas, for a lot of us, you were still entrenched in a lot of the conventions. Like to hear your views.
Wow, big question there. But I think I'm a rebel, I think, at heart. I think I was born a rebel. And I think that is probably part of my makeup. So I don't do very well, you know, in society in a way, because I rebel and everything. I will not take something for granted. I will question it. You see, I'm not likely to accept something without questioning it myself first. And then this has happened even when I was young. My family were kind of rice bowl Christians, you know, Christians who, you know, became Catholics and all that. So I kind of even rebel against that. And I think that, so to answer the first part of the question, it is in me to rebel, because I am not one of those who would just sit and accept something. I question things. I question why this has to happen, why that has to happen, why is this different, why is that different. And I think I'm like a sponge. I was absorbing things, you know, when the British were living in a house, in a black and white house above the hill from our village, and we were very, very poor. We had nothing to eat, and we had no electricity, no running water and all that. And then you go up and you see we go and look into the gardens of the British when they're having their garden tea party, and they have all this wonderful food from cold storage, you know, ham and turkey and all, and you think, oh my God, you're drooling, right, because your family don't have these things. And I think I just kept it in my mind, in my psyche probably. So it's all there. And some people say, oh, you know, do I kind of agonize over the past? I don't agonize about the poverty and all that, but when I'm writing out, in a way, it's a release as well. And I think that I'm very lucky that in England, I was exposed to the literary genres, you know, good writers, and, you know, who allow you to write with freedom, and you're not constrained. So I think that in the 1980s in Singapore, I believe, I wasn't here, that there were a lot of constraints over different things and how people should behave and all that. In a way, I was free from that. So I was in the UK at that time, so I didn't suffer that bit of Singapore. So I maybe, in some ways, I kind of have a kind of romantic view of Singapore in a way too. I mean, the kampong life is very, I mean, somebody said to me, do you want to go back to the kampong days? I said, no. I don't want to go back to the jambans, you know, the bucket and chuck it toilets, you know, where there's no flush toilet. No, I don't want. I'm not romanticizing the poverty we had. But I'm saying that poverty and challenges actually make you a better person, a more interesting person at least. You're not going to sit down and say, oh God, I'm poor, and I'll die poor, and I'll do nothing with my life. You know, because you have no education. Well, I didn't get to go, my brother is around actually, so he was one who used to go on a bicycle and send me to Cedar School, you know, and I went to school late, you know, because we couldn't afford it. So the boys were educated, but not the girls. So my mother was selling food, you know, nasi lemak and peranakan kueh. Luckily, she's a good peranakan cook, you know, and then to get us to go to school. So education became precious for me then. You know, you value it. When it's given, something is given free, you don't value it as much. So I think all those things made me think about things a lot. And when I was in UK, I was fortunate that when I wrote my short story, and you know, I was quite surprised when the phone call came. The title of the story that won this award in UK, it's called Tropical Fever, because it was this old Englishman in England, and he can't remember what happened, but he had a life in Singapore in the 1940s. So that was the story, going back and forth between England and 1940s Singapore. So, and I was living in a small English village in Greyshot in Surrey, and there was a postman, and it was the first post office in England who had a woman post office, you know, to serve in that little village. That was the history of it. But anyway, there was this funny man. He was very humorous, typical English humor and all that. And he used to say, I don't see you around a lot. Where do you go? I know. She said, no, where do you live? So I said, I named the road. She said, oh, that's a very smart road, you know, with lots of big houses around there. I said, yes. I said, but I'm actually the maid. So he said, what? I said, yeah, I'm the maid. I came over to learn English. So I'm working with an English family with children. So, and you know, when they go skiing, I carry their skis and all that. So this story went on for a while, and I really carried it through. I mean, it was real fiction in life. So every time I go into the post office. He said, hey, how about sending me postcards from wherever you go? I said, oh, okay. Pop in a postcard. So you get postcards from all over. I'm skiing in Germany or Italy or wherever, or Switzerland and all that kind of thing. So he said, yeah, really, you have such a good life. I said, yeah. He said, can't you see my English is improving? I said, so anyway, what happened was when I won the award, it was in the papers, right? And in the Surrey papers as well, it has Singapore-born writer win, shortlisted, no, long-listed, because you have to be long-listed first. They long-listed 50, and then from there they shortlisted. So when the long list came out, he didn't say anything. This is so typically English. I walked into the post office, and you know, in the old days, men still carry handkerchiefs, right? You know, so he had this big white handkerchief, and he just took it and he wiped it around. I've got tropical fever.
Josephine, some parents never die.
Well done, John.
Okay. All right. I think maybe we we sort of stop here, unless there's a question that somebody is dying to ask, Mati must ask. Otherwise, then I would like to invite you for